We begin with the latest on Canada-U.S. trade talks. A new higher tariff is now in effect for all non-CUSMA-compliant goods. President Donald Trump raising the rate from 25% to 35% after negotiations failed to reach a breakthrough. Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking in Kelowna saying he's trying to seek the best deal for Canadians.
To be clear, Canada remains committed to CUSMA for the stability and the prosperity it provides on both sides of the border, and will continue to engage in constructive trade negotiations with the United States in the pursuit of the best deal for both sides. I haven't spoken to the President in recent days. We'll speak when it makes sense.
Pete Hoekstra is the U.S. Ambassador to Canada. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Ambassador.
It's good to be here. Thank you for the invite.
I want to ask you about Canada has sent 2 senior ministers to Mexico, and this is an opportunity Canada sees to perhaps deepen the relationship between Canada and Mexico. But it comes at a time after Mexico was granted an extension to continue negotiations with the United States over trade and tariffs, while Canada was not given that same grace. Why did Mexico get an extension and Canada did not?
Well, I think it's because of the feeling in the room or the energy in the room when the negotiators are talking to each other. And, so the decision was made by our team, to the president. The president decided, let's give Mexico an extension, put the 35% tariff on Canada. But remember, this is for non-USMCA compliant products. So I've talked to, your ambassador to the U.S., Ambassador Hillman. I think she's characterized Canada's position right now as one that lots of countries around the world would be envious of, because the effective tariff rate for Canada right now on all goods and services going into the U.S. is about 5%. That's not a bad place for Canada to be right now.
So if I understand your answer to that question correctly, you're saying it's the energy in the room is the reason why Canada got hit and Mexico did not?
Well, Canada really, number one, Canada really didn't get hit very hard. Okay?
But still got hit, and Mexico did not.
Mexico did not, and it's, the negotiators, I'm assuming, are sitting in the room and saying, okay, we're making, the negotiations that we're in right now with Mexico and where we believe we are headed, say, we're making significant progress, and maybe the dynamics in terms of describing the relationship with Canada are slightly different. I'm not in the room, okay? So I can't tell you specifically why Canada got hit with those tariffs and Mexico did not.
But you're the ambassador to Canada, so
I am the ambassador to Canada, yes.
So why, I guess my question is, does Canada, I guess another way to sort of get at this is, did Canada, the fact that Canada has imposed retaliatory tariffs on the United States, did that play a factor in the decision? There's
a number of issues that could affect the decision that the president made. It's retaliatory tariffs. I mean, we've carved out USMCA, which gets you to that very low effective tariff rate. That's not my description. That's the descriptions of Canadians who are looking at this. There are other products that are covered by USMCA that Canada has totally banned from coming into their country. All right. So I think all of that stuff kind of plays into where this relationship is now. Again, I think Canadians have described this. This is not America. Mm-hmm. Canadians have said, hey, we're being almost as tough as China in our actions against the United States of America. And I think, they wear that as kind of a little bit of a badge of honor. Those are decisions that Canadians have made, and as a sovereign country, that's how you have decided to engage and negotiate with the United States of America.
So I guess when Canadians look at what's gone on over the past week or so, I know that this has been a months-long process, but when Canadians take a step back and look, okay, Mexico is treated one way, Canada is treated another way. These are both of America's 2 largest trading partners, both members of the USMCA or CUSMA, and we call it in Canada. Right. I think Canadians want to know, why did Canada see an increase and Mexico not?
That's a decision for them at this point to have their negotiators describe to them what the process feels like and why they believe the United States was treated differently. But we're treating every country
No, but I'm
differently.
talking why the United States is treating Canada differently than Mexico because of that agreement.
Because we're treating every country based on the circumstances that we are seeing. The UK got one type of an agreement. The EU got another type. Japan, South Korea. We've reached and finalized, or at least in a rough outline form, the direction for trade with most of our major trading partners. And we've outlined one for Mexico and we outlined one for Canada. Each one is based on the specific circumstances as the president and his team sees where we are right now and the path forward.
Is there any scenario you can see where Canada is able to get a new trade agreement with the United States for as long as those counter tariffs are in place?
The Canadian counter tariffs?
Yeah, the Canadian retaliatory tariffs that were imposed after the initial tariffs were imposed on Canada, Canada's initial response. As long as those retaliatory tariffs remain in place, do you see any scenario where Donald Trump will agree to a deal with Canada?
I think that when you get to an agreement, you're going to have a broad-based agreement, and the president ultimately will answer that question. It will depend on other parts of the agreement in terms of whether the president believes that those are warranted. I'm not aware of any of the agreements that have been set to date where, there's only two countries that have done retaliatory tariffs, China and Canada. So taking a look at the pattern of the agreements that we have to date, I find it hard to believe that Canada with retaliatory tariffs, that those will stay in place.
And so do you find it hard to, or do you see a scenario where Canada could reach that deal if those tariffs are in place?
I don't think those are there are a lot more serious issues than those retaliatory tariffs. The retaliatory tariffs are an indication of the elbows up strategy engaged with the United States. But those specific tariffs, we've got a whole lot of issues that are out there. The base level of tariffs that will affect the country. We've got aluminum, steel, copper, auto parts, and those types of things that are going to have a much larger impact moving forward than those retaliatory tariffs. I think they're an irritant right now. I've talked to someone, it's kind of like, we see what Canada's doing. We see the personal attacks that, certain Canadian politicians are making against. They're very, very cognizant of everything that's going on in this trade realm and these negotiations.
That said, can you understand why in this moment there is the political space, there seems to be public support for Canada to have those elbows up? Can you see why Canadians are angry?
Actually, we've engaged in a strategy, a global strategy, to change how America does trade, all right? Most of these countries have found a way to work with us, to be constructive, and to reach an agreement with us. Canada at this point, they're in some cases they're angry. It is, the government's been very effective at selling the strategy of elbows up. Okay, but America needed to get its house in order, our financial house in order. The president wants prosperity, security, and stability for the American people. Trade was one of the elements that he indicated that he wanted to get under control to deliver a total solution. He's passed the big, beautiful tax bill that we think will bring manufacturing, provides incentives to create jobs in the United States of America. We've secured our border. These were things that we needed to do to straighten our house out to move forward. Canada needs to do what it needs to do. Your Prime Minister is doing some of the same things.
So far in the trade frameworks that have been announced by the president and other countries, I'm thinking the European Union, Japan, the base tariff rate is 15%. Do you see any sort of world where any country can get below that 15%?
I think the UK is at 10.
Okay, pardon me, UK at 10.
Yeah, below 10, I think would be very, very tough.
So no matter what, are tariffs, I guess another question is, are tariffs just here to stay?
From the
American
Donald Trump
perspective,
the answer is yes. I think the president has made it clear that he will have, we will have a new trade regime where there will be tariffs for every single country in the world.
In response to this, we've talked a little bit about, the reaction from the Canadian public. Some Canadians are choosing to boycott American products. Some Canadians are choosing to change their vacation plans. Some are even going so far as to selling their vacation properties because they're frustrated in this moment. Do you think that's sustainable?
That is for the Canadians to decide. What I will point out is that Americans are continuing to move forward. We still consider Canadians and Canada a strong friend. Americans are still vacationing here. We have not banned American products. We don't have, consumer-driven, buy American and stop buying Canadian. Those are things that Americans have not done. We get along, we believe we get along great with Canada. If the Canadians want to make this more of a personal anti-American perspective, that is their business, okay? But I was just out in Vancouver and went to one of the tourist areas, and I said, hey, what's happening with American tourism? They said, we're seeing as many Americans, if not more, than what we did last year. And it's kind of like, great. That, to me, it's a symbol of the strength of the American-Canadian relationship. If Canadians want to take that relationship in a different way, as some of your Canadian officials are saying, don't travel, don't visit America. Okay, that's the decision that you make.
You sort of talk about it like it's in a vacuum, like there hasn't been a whole set of circumstances around this that would perhaps put Canadians in a position where they feel uncomfortable with the Canada-U.S. relationship right now, between the 51st state comments, between the tariffs, between Donald Trump saying he wants auto jobs out of Canada and in the United States. Those are things that add up. Do you see why Canadians might look at those things and make these decisions?
I fully respect the decisions that Canadians are making. Okay. At the same time, it is the Canadians that have said we're going to totally reconsider the USMCA agreement.
Donald Trump has said that, though. Donald Trump has said that he wants to review the USMCA.
Okay, but we've not taken. He wants to review it, absolutely, which was in the agreement from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Okay, but we specifically in this latest round of tariffs, we exempted USMCA. The Canadians have tariffed USMCA. They have banned USMCA products. Canada is reconsidering the military alliance that we have.
Canada wants to deepen the military alliance. Canada is looking to invest in the Golden Dome. Canada has invested $1 billion in border security. Is that not something that registers?
And also they've basically put on hold or canceled F-35s.
And is that something that's been noticed by the White House?
The White House is very cognizant of what goes on in Canada, what goes on in the UK. Absolutely. It's all part of a package that, these folks are, as are the Canadians. I think they're good negotiators. And if you're going to be a good negotiator, you not only have to take a look at what's on the table, but you also have to take a look at what's in the background. We have a very positive, we want a strong relationship with Canada under this new framework that we believe will bring prosperity, security, and stability to the U.S. And we believe that for North America, a strong, prosperous, and secure U.S. is good for Canada, just like a strong Canada is good for the United States of America. We thrive off of each other. Neither one of us wants a weakened neighbor.
Okay, those are all my questions, Ambassador Hookstra. I could ask you questions all day, but we are only an hour-long program, so thank you very much for your time today and answering our questions. I really appreciate it.
Hey, great. Thanks for the invite.
Coming in.
We don't automatically adjust. We look at what we can do for our industry that's most effective. In some cases, that will be to remove tariffs. We have removed some tariffs over time so that, for example, the auto industry can function more effectively. And we'll look at opportunities to do so, because in the end, we're looking at having the best impact in Canada.
All right, for our discussion of all of this, the Power panel is here. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. And here with me in studio, Laura D'Angelo was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst. Emily, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of what you just heard from Ambassador Hookstra when he says that Canada did not get that same extension, when he sort of cited the energy in the room? What do you make of that?
Sorry, you're speaking to me?
Oh, yes, sorry, Emily. sorry, yes. My bad, yes.
Yes. So what I make of it is that beyond the energy in the room, I know that it's hard for us as Canadians to hear this, but there is a specific policy agenda that Donald Trump has. What he wants is to have the other sector in the U.S. and in the U.S. only. There are certain industries that he wants to have in the U.S. Basically only or as much as possible, including lumber, including a lot of things that are now produced in Canada. And so there are some non-negotiable from his point of view that would make it hard for us to strike a deal. And I think the only way out for us is midterm, long-term pressures from the American realizing that what Donald Trump actually wants is dumb. But that's going to take a while because as long as that's what Donald Trump wants to actually, and he said it in not so subtle ways, destroy the Canadian auto sector, for example, there isn't a way to negotiate a deal out of his actual objective. And we need to realize that this is what he wants to do.
I was going to say, let's go around the room and hear, Laura, what are you thinking when it comes to, what Ambassador Hookstra said in terms of, it seemed that, he didn't want to sort of get ahead of the president in making any sort of announcements because we saw he did get ahead of himself when it came to the 51st state talk. And now when it comes to these ongoing, trade negotiations, he doesn't want to sort of get ahead of it. But what do you make of what he had to say?
It was so interesting watching it because he really was trying not to get ahead of it, but it was also like he really was holding himself back. You could really see it. And what I take from that is the Americans are in not a dissimilar position to Canadians right now, which is Donald Trump is driving this bus. He is pretty unpredictable, and there's often things that influence him that are so wildly out of the realm of possibility for most people that it's tough for him to predict it, let alone for Canadians to predict it. And where that drives me to is the big end game here is that Canada needs to be less reliant on the U.S. And that's why we're seeing so many ministers travel right now. That's why we're seeing conversations with so many other countries, because it can't stay the same. I think the ambassador also said he didn't see a world where there's a deal with less than 10% tariffs. So the economic landscape for Canada has changed so drastically that I imagine it's very difficult for him to walk a line between giving information to journalists like yourselves and Canadians that feels comforting, but also not get over his skis.
And Kate, what do you make of the fact that, the Friday, August 1st deadline has come and gone? How would you sort of assess the position Canada is in at this moment, given that these tariffs have gone up? There are broad carve-outs under the current tariff regime, but some tariffs did go up, and those baseline tariffs when it comes to steel, aluminum, and the challenges related to tariffs for the auto industry, copper, it's still a very difficult moment. But how would you sort of assess how we got to this moment and where we are right now?
Yeah, we're in a definitively weakened position today than we were April 28th or August 1st. We have more tariffs, to your point, Katie, than we did since the last election. We have that new copper tariff. And based on the ambassador's comments, based on the prime minister's comments, it doesn't seem to me that we are necessarily further along in the renegotiation of that deal. So this is where the prime minister is going to run into a challenge. He was the one that laid out for Canadians during the election campaign that he would get a deal done and that this was a top priority. Now we are being told to be patient and that we can't take a bad deal. And I don't know how it can be both the greatest economic crisis of our lifetime, as the prime minister has claimed, but also simultaneously that patience is a virtue. So I think the prime minister is going to come under some continued challenge here as he tries to make the case that he is the right guy, but that really this very urgent crisis that absolutely demanded the attention of our nation can be dealt with sometime in 2026. I don't know why Canadians would buy that Donald Trump is going to be all that different a negotiator in a broader CUSMA renegotiation than how he's proving to be right now.
And Emily, on that point that Kate just made, at this point, we haven't seen Mark Carney take any sort of steps to retaliate further. He campaigned on that elbows up strategy throughout the election campaign. And today he said that he was even considering looking for ways to possibly remove some tariffs or lower some tariffs. What do you make of what Carney said today on that front versus what he campaigned on?
I think that's going to need further explanation in terms of just looking at the actual pros and cons of it. There is obviously some ways in which Canadians themselves could be hurt if there was some retaliation on tariff. People are just seeking to import, but at the same time, if the revenues that would be raised by the government would then be spent on helping those same Canadians, basically we need to look at the numbers of it. It's not so much about the emotions of it than really just about the devil that is in the details of whether it makes sense or not. There is also, to Katie's point, there is also a lot that can be done between now and 2026 that has nothing to do with negotiating with Donald Trump, but obviously investing in some parts of the Canadian economy, negotiating with other countries, and making sure that the Canadian economy is more resilient. And I think there's been some announcements on that this week, and so that as well will take time in terms of making sure that we understand what those proposals are, because some of them it's announcement, but once again it's in the details. It's how they're being implemented that we'll see whether or not they're effective and they actually protect the country. And then there's the question as well of who Donald Trump is going to be in 2026. It's not so much about his character, but about his political situation. The American civil society democracy is very volatile right now. There's going to be a mid-election by then. Things can change very fast. Even right now with the Epstein file, he's all over his head, and so we'll see how that goes as well. And so the situation can change in the U.S. just not because Donald Trump is a different man, but because the country is at a different place politically as well. So we'll see how that goes as well.
And Laura, I'm very curious. We've seen Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, come out and make a number of announcements in terms of supports for different industries. So we had steel, and now we've got softwood lumber. Is that a signal to you that, perhaps Canada recognizes that it's in the same boat as all of these other trading countries, all these other countries that have trading relationships with the United States, that we are just in this new normal where tariffs are just here and it's about controlling what you can control?
I think that's a really good assessment. And the Prime Minister has said tariffs are here, that we are in a totally new relationship with the U.S. But there's two big ways to think about it. There's, the original USMCA, which is one massive part of the pie, if not most of the pie. And there's this tiny other piece that does not fall under the USMCA that are being hit by tariffs. And what I see, what those supports for softwood lumber and steel, for example, signal to me is that the Prime Minister and his team have a dogged focus on that portion of the pie, ensuring that those industries and those workers are supported and can continue to work and do business in Canada. And I think that we should look at that for what it is, which is the government is doing its best to get the best deal, not just any deal, which the Prime Minister did talk about during the election quite extensively, actually, was that it needs to be a good deal for Canada. And what that signals to me is that they are working on buying themselves the time to make sure they get the best deal possible.
Kate, what do you think that the Prime Minister should be doing differently in this moment? Is there something that really stands out to you that you think could be adjusted or changed to deliver a better outcome for Canadians?
I think, hard to diagnose, hard to get in the president's mind. I think that there is a correct focus on diversifying our trading relationships, and that's why you see ministers down in Mexico. I do think when tariffs are being used as the rationale for the spending that we see today, for instance, on softwood, $1.2 billion, Canadians will start to expect more detail on where those negotiations are going. If we're going to continue to spend with tariffs as a reality, Canadians will want to know that, there's going to be some kind of a conclusion that ends in Canada's favor around this. So, support for workers can be there, but I think Canadians are going to start asking some more questions on details of some of these spending commitments that are being made, because again, we're not much further along in terms of our information as the general public on the status of these negotiations, but we are paying a very hefty financial penalty for continuing to be under this tariff threat.
Emily, I want to ask you about the opportunity that Canada is seeking in this moment, trying to diversify its markets. What do you make of the fact that the two senior ministers are down in Mexico right now, holding these high-level talks, trying to diversify?
I think François-Philippe Champagne is, first of all, there to apologize. It was him who threw Mexico under the bus in the last December or last winter. And I think it's good that he's going to Mexico in person to try to mend that relationship. I think the haste in which we thought and we being the government, not me, that basically if we were to insist on the very special relationship that Canada and U.S. have. It's been so long ago, it seems like another era, but there used to be a time where our strategy was to insist that Canada-U.S. is basically a historical exception on the face of basically world history and humanity, and that this is why Donald Trump should be nice to us. It sounds very silly in hindsight. It was already silly back then, and I'm really glad that we're now going in person in Mexico to trying to build those relationships. The ways in which back then we tried to basically isolate ourselves by stressing this American exceptionalism or Canadian American exceptionalism was a mistake, and now we're trying to mend that mistake and making sure that we have allies not just in Mexico but in Latin America at large, and making sure that we're also warming up those relationships. I think the G7 meeting in Alberta was also a way of doing that by inviting all those extra players that were not part of the G7. And so I think we're really doing that. It shows a state of strategy that personally I think is really welcome.
Okay, we have 1 minute left, and I want to give you both a chance to weigh in here really quickly. Laura, what do you think about where things stand right now in terms of going down to Mexico and try to restart those conversations?
I think it's smart. I think that the government is doing what they should be doing. Ministers are going to Mexico. They're also, to Emily's point, actually going all over the world right now. The trade minister has been all over because we have to start diversifying. We have to shore up our economy and our relationships worldwide.
And Kate, to you on that point as well?
Yeah, I hope we're getting advice on negotiation because Mexico was able to get a stay in their tariffs as opposed to an increase, which is what Canada received. Of course, we should be diversifying our trade relationships. I think that it just may mean taking a hard look at some of our policies, including supply management, including corporate tax, to look at why countries and companies aren't looking at investing here and growing their economies here, and that's going to take a little more time than just a couple of meetings down in Mexico.
All right, we will leave the conversation here. It was so nice to see everyone. Thank you, Emily, Nicolas, Kate Harrison, and Laura D'Angelo. Thank you very much.